Story 1. Last track, the blood trail ended at the edge of a cliff, but there was no body at the bottom. I am a search and rescue coordinator from Colorado, 45 years old. I have pulled lost hikers off mountains, recovered bodies from avalanches, and tracked missing persons through conditions that would kill most people. I understand how people die in the wilderness, but what I found in the Nahana Valley last winter defied every principle of survival, predation, and death that I thought I understood. The call came in February. A documentary crew filming wildlife in the Northwest Territories had lost contact with 2 of their team members. The Canadian authorities requested international assistance, and my name came up because I had Arctic experience. They flew me into Yellowknife, briefed me on the situation, and told me the search area was in a region the local Dean people called Cursed, a valley where people went missing with disturbing regularity, where bodies were found without their heads, where something had been hunting humans for over a century. They called it the Valley of the Headless Men, and the predator that stalked it was known as the Wahila. I had heard the stories. Every search and rescue professional who works the far north has heard them. A wolf that is not quite a wolf. Something massive and prehistoric that survived the Ice Age by adapting, by becoming smarter and more vicious than anything else in its ecosystem. The indigenous people spoke of it with genuine fear, describing a creature that stood as tall as a horse, with jaws powerful enough to crush a man, his skull like an eggshell. I treated it as folklore, a cautionary tale to keep people out of dangerous terrain. But I was wrong about that. I was wrong about many things. The helicopter dropped me at the documentary crew at base camp on February 14th. The remaining team members were traumatized, barely coherent. They had not seen what happened to their colleagues. The 2 missing men had gone out to set remote cameras on a game trail. That was 3 days ago. They never came back. I found their trail within an hour, boot prints in hard-packed snow, leading north into a narrow canyon where the sun barely reached the ground. The tracks were clear and purposeful, no signs of distress or confusion. They had walked into that canyon with confidence, 2 experienced outdoorsmen who knew what they were doing. 2 miles in, I found the first camera. It was mounted on a tree at chest height, positioned to capture wildlife movement along a creek bed. But the housing was cracked, the lens shattered, and across the plastic casing were scratches, deep gouges that looked like claw marks but were spaced too far apart for any bear or wolverine I knew. I kept moving. The boot prints continued north, following the canyon as it narrowed and the walls grew steeper. Then I found the second camera. This one had been ripped completely off its mount, the metal bracket bent at a 90-degree angle. The camera itself was 30 feet away, buried in snow with teeth marks punched through the waterproof casing. I measured the bite radius with my gloved hand. 8 inches across, maybe more. No wolf has a mouth that large. No wolf that currently exists. The boot prints split half a mile further on. One set continued north, the other veered east, moving fast, the stride length suggesting a run. I followed the eastern trail first. It led up a steep slope, through dense brush, to the edge of a cliff overlooking the valley below. That was where I found the blood, a spray pattern on the snow. Arterial, the kind that comes from a severed major vessel. The trail led right to the cliff edge and then stopped. I looked over, 100-foot drop to jagged rocks and frozen ground. But there was no body, no impact crater, no evidence that anyone had fallen. I radioed base camp and reported what I had found. They told me to continue the search. They told me a recovery team was being assembled. They told me to be careful. I should have called for extraction right then. But I had a job to do. So I backtracked to where the boot prints had split and followed the northern trail. This one led deeper into the canyon, into a section where the walls pinched together and the shadows never lifted. The tracks became erratic, stumbling. The man had been running, falling, getting back up, and overlaid on top of his boot prints were other tracks. Paw prints, massive ones, following his exact path with the patience of something that knows its prey cannot escape. I found his pack first, torn open, contents scattered. Then his rifle, the barrel bent like someone had folded it in half. Then scraps of his parka, shredded into ribbons and left hanging from branches like prayer flags. The blood trail started shortly after. Drops at first, then smears, then large patches where he had fallen and tried to crawl. I followed it for another quarter mile, my heart pounding, my hand on my sidearm even though I knew a pistol would be useless against whatever had done this. The trail ended at a cave entrance, a dark opening in the canyon wall, maybe 8 feet high and 6 feet wide. The snow around the entrance was trampled flat, stained dark with old and new blood. and leading into the cave were drag marks. Something heavy had been pulled inside. I should have waited for backup. Protocol demanded it, but I could hear sounds coming from inside the cave. Wet sounds, cracking, the noise a butcher makes when breaking down a carcass. I drew my pistol and turned on my headlamp. The cave entrance opened into a larger chamber, the walls slick with ice and moisture. The smell hit me immediately. Rotten musk and something else. Something wild and ancient that made my hindbrain scream to run. The floor was covered with bones. Human bones mixed with caribou and wolf and bear. Skulls lined the walls like trophies. All of them cracked open at the back, the brain cases empty. And in the center of the chamber, lying on a flat rock like an altar, was the missing man, his body. Or what was left of it. His head was gone, removed with the same surgical precision I had seen in the forensic photos from old cases. The neck was severed cleanly. No tearing, as if something had gripped and twisted with calculated force. His chest cavity was open, ribs pulled apart, organs removed. I heard breathing behind me. Deep, rhythmic, the sound of something large moving in the darkness beyond my light. I turned and saw it, just for a moment, just long enough for my brain to register something impossible. A shape that was wolf-like but far too large, with a head that was too broad and eyes that reflected my headlamp with an intelligence that was almost human. It was crouched in the shadows at the back of the cave, watching me with the stillness of a predator that does not need to announce itself. The Wahila. Real. Not a legend or an exaggeration, but a living, breathing creature that had been hunting in this valley since before humans learned to make fire. I ran. Every instinct I had screamed at me to fight or freeze, but I ran because that was the only thing my body would let me do. I crashed through the cave entrance, slipped in blood, fell hard, got up and kept running. I could hear it behind me. Not chasing but following, matching my pace, hurting me. I made it back to the cliff where I had found the first blood trail. The sun was setting, painting the snow orange and red. I turned to face the canyon, my pistol raised, knowing it was useless but needing to feel like I had some control. The Wahila emerged from the shadows. In the failing light I could see it clearly. 7 feet at the shoulder, maybe more. White fur fading to gray along the spine and legs. The head was massive, bear-like in its proportions but with the sharp features of a wolf. And the teeth, even from 50 feet away I could see the teeth, each one as long as my finger, designed for crushing bone and tearing flesh. But the eyes were the worst part. Yellow and knowing, measuring me, deciding if I was worth the effort of killing. We stood there for what felt like an eternity. The wind picked up, howling through the canyon, carrying with it the smell of the cave and the bodies inside. And then the Wahila did something I will never forget. It sat, like a dog responding to a command. It sat on its haunches and watched me with what I can only describe as curiosity. Then it stood, turned, and walked back into the canyon. Not running, not stalking, just walking, as if I had been dismissed. As if I was not worth adding to its collection. I hiked back to base camp in darkness. The recovery team arrived the next morning. I led them to the cave. The body was still there. The bones were still there. But the Wahila was gone. They took photographs, collected evidence, and told me this was classified. That I would sign a non-disclosure agreement and never speak about what I had found. I signed. But signing a document does not erase memory. It does not stop the nightmares or explain why I was allowed to live when so many others died. I think I know the answer now. The Wahila is not just a predator. It is a guardian, a keeper of boundaries. It kills those who disrespect its territory, who come north with greed or arrogance or the belief that humans are the apex species. But it also recognizes those who understand their place in the natural order, who show respect, who acknowledge that some places belong to creatures older and more powerful than us. I was allowed to leave because I understood, because when I stood at that cliff edge with my useless pistol, I was not defiant. I was terrified and humbled and absolutely certain that I was in the presence of something beyond human comprehension. The documentary crew never released their footage. The recovery operation was buried in bureaucratic red tape. The families of the dead were told it was a bear attack, even though no bear leaves evidence like that. The Nahana Valley remains restricted, with armed patrols keeping tourists and researchers away. But the Wahila is still there, still hunting. Still maintaining its territory with the efficiency of a predator that has perfected its craft over tens of thousands of years. And sometimes at night, when the wind howls just right, I hear that sound again. That deep, bone-shaking howl that is not quite a wolf and not quite anything else. A reminder that I was marked, that I was allowed to leave but not forgotten. So here's my question for you. and I want you to think carefully before answering in the comments. If you were face to face with something that could kill you in seconds, something prehistoric and powerful, would you have the wisdom to show respect? Or would you let pride and fear override your survival instincts? Because the Nahana Valley is still there, the Wahila is still hunting, and the collection of skulls in that cave grows larger with every person who enters that territory thinking they are the exception, thinking they are special, thinking they cannot be touched. I know better now. And if you are smart, you will know better too. Story 2. Thing that hummed below. I heard the humming 3 days before I saw what made it, and by then it was already too late to leave the research station alive. The sound came from beneath the ice at night, a low vibration that resonated through the metal floor of our temporary shelter and up through the bones in my feet. It was almost musical, like a lullaby sung by something that had never been human but understood enough about us to know what sounds might draw us closer. My colleague thought it was equipment malfunction or ice shifting in the lake. But the Inuit guide who delivered our supplies took one listen, went pale, and refused to come back. He left extra food and fuel, told us we were fools, and drove his snowmobile toward the distant lights of his village without looking back. That was the last time I saw another living person I could trust was real. My name is Ben. I am a glaciologist from Montana, and last winter I spent 2 weeks at a research station on a frozen lake in Nunavut, the Canadian Arctic. The project was simple enough. Study ice core samples, document climate change effects on permafrost, collect data. Standard work. I had done similar projects in Alaska and Greenland. The cold did not bother me. The isolation did not bother me. What bothered me was the humming, and what that humming meant about what lived in the water below us. The station was small, just 2 insulated modules connected by a short tunnel, sitting on the ice about a mile from shore. My partner was a younger researcher named Chris, fresh out of graduate school, eager and talkative in a way that got annoying after the first few days. We had everything we needed. Generators, heating, satellite internet, enough food for a month. The work was tedious but not difficult. Drill cores, log temperatures, take samples, repeat. The first week passed without incident. We fell into a routine. Wake at dawn, work until the brief daylight faded, eat dinner, review data, sleep. The silence was profound. No traffic, no voices, no birds. Just wind across empty ice and the occasional crack and groan of the frozen lake settling beneath us. The humming started on the 8th night. I woke around 2 in the morning to a sound I could not identify. Not quite music, not quite mechanical. A rhythmic vibration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I got up and walked through the station, checking equipment, looking for the source. Chris was still asleep. The generators were running normally. Outside, through the small window, I saw nothing but darkness and endless white. I went back to bed and tried to ignore it. By morning, it had stopped. I convinced myself it had been a dream or the wind playing tricks on metal and ice. But that night it returned, louder and more insistent. This time Chris heard it too. He sat up in his bunk and asked what the hell that sound was. I told him I did not know. We spent the next day trying to locate the source. We checked every piece of equipment, every connection, every possible mechanical explanation. Nothing. The station was functioning perfectly. As evening approached, Chris suggested it might be coming from below us, from the lake itself. Ice shifting against ice. Underwater currents creating pressure waves. Reasonable theories. But when the sun set and the humming began again, we both knew it was not ice or water. It was deliberate, purposeful, almost beckoning. On the 10th day, our Inuit guide arrived with supplies. His name was Thomas, and he had been making the weekly run to our station without complaint until that morning. He pulled up on his snowmobile, unloaded the boxes quickly, and was preparing to leave when Chris asked if he wanted coffee. Thomas hesitated, then agreed. We brought him inside, and that was when he heard it. The humming was faint during daylight, barely perceptible, but Thomas froze the moment it reached his ears. He asked if we had been hearing that sound at night. We said yes. His face changed. He set down his coffee and told us we needed to leave immediately, that the lake was not safe, that something was wrong. Chris laughed and asked what he meant. Thomas did not laugh. He said there were stories about this lake, old stories his grandmother had told him. Stories about the Kalupalik. I had heard the word before, vaguely, maybe in a documentary or a book about Arctic cultures. I asked Thomas to explain. He was reluctant, but eventually he told us. The Kalupalik were creatures from Inuit folklore, beings that lived under the ice. They had green skin and long hair and made a humming sound to lure people, especially children, close to the water's edge. Then they would pull them under, drag them down to whatever dark places existed beneath the frozen surface. Parents used the stories to keep children away from dangerous ice. Chris was dismissive. He told Thomas we appreciated the cultural perspective, but we were scientists and did not believe in folklore monsters. Thomas looked at him with something like pity, then looked at me. He said the humming was a warning, that we should leave while we still could. Then he walked out, got on his snowmobile, and disappeared across the ice. We never saw him again. That night, the humming was so loud it made our teeth ache. The entire station vibrated with it. Chris and I stood at the window, looking down at the ice below, and we saw something that made my stomach turn. Cracks. Dozens of hairline cracks radiating out from directly beneath our station, spreading like a spider web across the frozen surface. They had not been there that morning. We had checked. The ice was 4 feet thick in this area, solid enough to support a truck. I wanted to leave. I told Chris we should call for an early pickup, that something was wrong even if we did not understand what. But Chris was stubborn. He said we had a job to finish, that we could not abandon a research project because of some cracks and a weird noise. He said if I wanted to leave, I could, but he was staying. So I stayed, and that decision has haunted me every day since. On the 11th night, I woke to find Chris missing from his bunk. I called his name. No response. I searched the station. Empty. Then I saw that the exterior door was open, a rectangle of darkness leading out into the night. I grabbed a flashlight and my parka and went outside. The cold hit me like a physical blow. 40 below zero, maybe colder with the wind. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the ice. Then I saw Chris. He was standing about 50 yards from the station, near the edge of one of the larger cracks, staring down into the darkness below. He was not wearing a coat, just his thermal underwear and boots. He should have been freezing to death, but he was not shivering. He was perfectly still. I ran toward him, shouting his name. He did not respond. When I reached him and grabbed his shoulder, he finally looked at me, and his eyes were wrong. Vacant, empty, like he was sleepwalking or drugged. I tried to pull him back toward the station, but he resisted. He said he needed to see her, that she was calling him, that she was beautiful and lonely and wanted him to come down. I dragged him away from the crack by force and got him back inside. He seemed to snap out of it once we were in the warmth and light. He claimed he did not remember going outside, that he had been asleep, and then suddenly he was standing on the ice. I watched him for the rest of the night, terrified he would try to go back out. The humming continued, louder than ever, and now I could hear something else beneath it. A voice, faint and feminine and utterly inhuman. At first light, I used the satellite phone to call for an emergency extraction. The dispatcher said weather was moving in, that they could not get a helicopter to us for at least 36 hours. I told them it was urgent. They said they would do their best. I hung up and found Chris staring out the window at the ice. He was smiling. I asked what he was smiling about. He said she was close now, that he could feel her moving under the ice, that she was lonely and had been alone for so long and just wanted company. I asked who he was talking about. He turned to look at me, and I saw that his eyes were different. Darker. The pupils too large. He said the Kalupalik was real, that Thomas had been right, and that she was not evil. She was just hungry, and she had chosen him. That was when I knew I was in serious trouble. Whatever was below the ice had gotten into Chris' head, had infected his mind somehow through that humming, that voice. I locked him in his sleeping module and barricaded the door. He did not fight. He just lay down on his bunk and kept smiling at the ceiling. I spent that day preparing to survive alone until the helicopter arrived. I packed emergency supplies, kept the satellite phone close, and tried not to listen to the humming that now seemed to come from inside the station walls. Around noon, I heard Chris singing. Not humming, singing. Words I did not recognize in a language that predated anything human. When I looked through the small window in the door, I saw him standing on his bunk, his hands pressed against the ceiling, his mouth moving in that strange song. Then the ice beneath the station cracked. Not a small crack, a massive fracture that split the surface with a sound like a gunshot. The floor tilted, equipment slid and crashed. I grabbed onto a support beam as the entire structure shifted, one module dropping several inches as the ice beneath it gave way. Chris' door burst open from the pressure change, and he stumbled out, still singing, his eyes completely black now. He walked toward the exterior door. I tried to stop him, but he was stronger than he should have been. He pushed me aside without effort and went outside. I followed, shouting at him to stop, but he did not hear me. He walked straight to the largest crack in the ice, the one that had widened into a 2-foot gap with dark water visible below, and he knelt beside it. That was when I saw her, the Kalupalik. She rose from the water slowly, her long fingers gripping the edge of the ice. Her skin was the color of deep ocean water, green and gray and slick with moisture that steamed in the Arctic air. Her hair was impossibly long, flowing around her like she was still underwater, moving independently of the wind. Her face was almost human but wrong in ways I could not articulate. Too smooth, too symmetrical. Her eyes were completely black, like Chris's had become. And when she opened her mouth, the humming intensified until I thought my skull would split. Chris reached toward her. She reached back. Their fingers touched, and Chris's body went rigid. Then she pulled, and he slid into the water without a sound. He did not struggle. He did not scream. He just disappeared beneath the surface, pulled down by those green hands into darkness I could not see. The helicopter arrived 6 hours later. By then, the cracks had spread across the entire area around the station, making landing dangerous. They lowered a harness and pulled me up, and as we lifted away, I looked down and saw more cracks appearing, more dark water visible through the ice. And in some of those gaps, I saw shapes moving. Multiple shapes. The Kalupalik was not alone. The official report said Chris had fallen through unstable ice during a mental health episode brought on by isolation and extreme cold. They recovered some of our equipment but never found his body. The research project was permanently suspended. I was offered counseling and medical leave. I took both, but nothing helped. Nothing could explain what I had seen and heard during those final days on the ice. I live in Phoenix now, as far from frozen water as I can get. But sometimes at night I hear the humming, faint and distant, like it is coming from somewhere deep below the earth, below the aquifer, below everything. And I know she remembers me, the Kalupalik. She had wanted both of us. She had called to both of us. Chris answered. I did not. And I wonder if that means I am free, or if she is just patient. If she is waiting for the right moment, the right weakness, to call again. Thomas was right. The stories were not just folklore. They were warnings passed down through centuries because the Kalupalik are real. They live in the deepest, coldest waters of the Arctic. They sing to lonely people, to isolated people, to people who spend too long in the dark and the cold and the silence. And when you hear that humming, when you feel it in your bones, it is already too late to run. So here's what I need to ask you, and I want you to think about this carefully. If you were alone in a place so remote that help could not reach you for days, and you heard something impossible calling to you from the darkness, promising comfort and companionship and an end to loneliness, could you resist? Could you stay rational and safe? Or would some part of you, some deep and desperate part, want to answer that call just to know you were not alone anymore? Write your answer in the comments, because I need to understand if Chris was weak, or if what happened to him could happen to anyone who stays too long in places where humans were never meant to survive. Story 3. Copper Guardian. The water was perfectly calm when my boat, his engine died. And that was the first sign that something beneath Lake Superior wanted my attention. I am a commercial diver from Michigan, 48 years old. I have explored shipwrecks across the Great Lakes, recovered bodies from depths that would crush most men, and seen things on the lake floor that defied explanation. But nothing in 20 years of diving prepared me for what guards the copper deposits in the deep waters off Isle Royale. Nothing prepared me for Mishipeshu. The job came through a mining company contact in August. They had located what they believed was a significant copper deposit in Lake Superior, about 12 miles northeast of Isle Royale. The deposit showed up on sonar as an unusual formation, and they needed someone to dive down and take samples. The pay was exceptional, triple my normal rate. They wanted it done quickly and quietly, before filing the proper permits. That should have been my warning. When someone offers you that much money to work fast and keep quiet, there is always a reason. But I needed the cash. My business was struggling. My insurance premiums had doubled. So I took the job and told myself it was just another dive. I launched from Grand Portage on a Wednesday morning. The lake was mirror smooth, rare for Superior, which is known for sudden storms that can sink a freighter in minutes. The Ojibwe people who live along the shore have always treated this lake with fear and respect. They speak of Mishipeshu, the great water lynx, a spirit creature that lives in the deepest parts of the lake and guards the copper that lies beneath the stone. I knew the stories. Every diver on the Great Lakes knows them. But I treated them the same way I treated tales of ghost ships and phantom lights. Folklore. Entertainment for tourists. I was a professional. I dealt in facts and physics and the hard reality of cold water and pressure. I was wrong to dismiss those stories. The Ojibwe understood something I did not, that some places in this world are protected by forces older than human civilization, and that taking what is guarded comes with a price. I anchored over the coordinates the mining company provided. The sonar showed the bottom at 320 feet, right at the edge of my safe diving depth. The water was crystal clear, visibility easily 100 feet, which was unusual. Superior's waters are typically dark with tannins and sediment, but that day I could see straight down into the blue-black depths, and even from the surface something felt wrong about what I was looking at. The formation on the bottom was not natural. It was too symmetrical, too deliberate. It looked like walls, like ruins, like something built by intelligent hands and then drowned when the lake level rose thousands of years ago. I geared up and went over the side. The water was cold, 40 degrees even in August, cold enough to kill you in minutes without a wetsuit. I descended slowly, equalizing pressure, watching my depth gauge. At 50 feet, the light began to change, taking on a greenish quality. At 100 feet, I could still see the surface, a bright circle above me getting smaller with every breath. At 200 feet, I saw the copper, veins of it running through the rock face like veins of blood through skin. But it was not raw copper ore. It was worked copper, shaped, carved with symbols and patterns that looked like writing but in no language I recognized. And the formation I had seen on sonar was definitely not natural. It was a structure, something like a temple or a tomb, built from massive stone blocks and decorated with copper sheets that still gleamed after God knows how many centuries underwater. I should have surfaced immediately. Should have called the mining company and told them this was an archaeological site, not a deposit to be mined. But I was mesmerized. I moved closer, running my gloved hand over the carved copper, feeling the patterns beneath my fingers. That was when I felt the vibration, a deep thrumming that came through the water and into my bones. Low frequency, subsonic, like the purr of some enormous cat. The water around me began to move, swirling in a pattern that had no relation to currents or my movements. And the light changed again, taking on a reddish tint, as if the water itself was filling with blood. I looked up and saw it, not clearly at first, just a shape moving in the deeper water beyond the structure. Something large, very large. Its movement was fluid and serpentine, undulating through the water with a grace that did not match its size. Then it turned toward me and I saw the head, feline but huge, the size of a car, with copper-colored scales that reflected the dim light. 2 horns curved back from its skull, made of what looked like pure copper, polished and gleaming. Its eyes were the worst part, slitted like a cat, but intelligent, ancient, filled with a cold awareness that pinned me in place like an insect under glass. Mishipeshu, the underwater panther, the guardian of Lake Superior, is copper. Real, not a myth or a misidentified sturgeon, but a living creature that had been in these waters since before the first humans crossed into North America. It circled me slowly, its body extending back into the darkness farther than I could see. Scales scraped against stone as it moved, making a sound like wind chimes made of metal. The thrumming grew stronger, vibrating in my chest, making my regulator buzz against my teeth. I knew I should ascend, but I was frozen, trapped between terror and a strange sense of awe. This thing was beautiful in the way a tiger is beautiful, deadly and perfect and utterly indifferent to human concerns. It stopped circling and hung in the water 15 feet away, studying me with those slitted eyes. Then it moved forward, slowly, deliberately, until its head was close enough that I could have reached out and touched it. The copper horns were covered in carvings, the same symbols I had seen on the temple walls. And its breath, if that is what it was, came out in streams of bubbles that smelled like minerals and deep earth and something else, something that reminded me of ozone before a lightning strike. I understood in that moment that I was being evaluated, judged. The Ojibwe stories had been clear about this. Mishipeshu protected the copper not out of greed but as a guardian protects something sacred. And those who came to steal, who came with disrespect and greed, were punished, drowned, pulled to the bottom and held there until their lungs gave out. I had come to take samples, to help a mining company exploit this place for profit. And now I was face to face with the thing that had drowned countless others for the same transgression. The creature opened its mouth, rows of teeth, copper-colored like its scales, each one the size of a knife blade. I could see down its throat, into a darkness that seemed to extend far deeper than its body should allow. And I knew it was deciding whether to let me live or add me to the collection of the drowned that must litter the lake floor around this place. Then something changed. A shift in the water pressure or the creature. This mood. Its eyes narrowed and it released a sound. Not a roar, but something between a growl and the ringing of a massive bell. The vibration slammed into me, knocking my regulator loose, filling my mouth with the metallic taste of Lake Superior water. I fumbled for my backup regulator, got it in place, cleared it. When I looked up, the creature was moving away, its massive body coiling around the temple structure, scales scraping stone. It stopped at what looked like an entrance, a dark opening in the rock, and turned to look back at me one more time. Then it vanished into the darkness, and I was alone with the ruins and the copper and the certain knowledge that I had just been given a warning. I surfaced too fast. I knew better, but I did it anyway, driven by panic and the desperate need to get away from that place. I should have gotten bed, should have needed a decompression chamber. But somehow I made it to the boat without incident, as if the lake itself had decided to let me go. I pulled anchor and headed back to Grand Portage at full throttle. Behind me the water churned, massive swells rising from nowhere despite the clear sky. I looked back once and saw something break the surface. A coil of scaled body, copper gleaming in the sunlight, easily 50 feet long. Then it was gone, and the water went calm again. I called the mining company when I got to shore, told them the site was unstable, the copper deposit was inaccessible. The whole operation was too dangerous to pursue. They were angry, but I did not care. I refunded their advance payment and told them to find someone else. But the story does not end there, because a month later another diver took the job, someone younger and more desperate for money. The mining company told him it was a simple recovery operation. They did not mention what I had found, did not warn him about what guarded that place. They found his boat drifting 3 days later, empty. His gear was still on board, but he was gone. The Coast Guard searched for a week. They never found a body. The official report said he had likely fallen overboard and drowned, swept away by currents. But I know what happened to him. I know because I went back once, not to dive, but just to anchor over the side and pay my respects. And when I looked down into that impossibly clear water, I could see something on the bottom near the temple. Another body, held in place by the current, arms spread like it was swimming, face tilted up toward the surface. The diver who replaced me, drowned and kept as a warning. Another guardian for the copper. The Ojibwe were right to fear Mishipeshu, right to treat the copper in Lake Superior as sacred and forbidden. Because some treasures are not meant to be taken. Some places are protected by forces that predate human law and human greed. And some spirits, some guardians, have been keeping watch for so long that they have become part of the lake itself. I sold my diving business 6 months ago. Moved inland. I do not go near large bodies of water anymore. Because sometimes at night I still feel that vibration, that subsonic thrumming that comes up through the ground and into my bones. And I know it is Mishipeshu, still down there in the cold, deep water, still guarding what it has protected for thousands of years. Still remembering the face of every human who tried to take what was not theirs to take. Including mine. I was allowed to leave. But I was also marked, remembered. And I know with absolute certainty that if I ever go back to Lake Superior, if I ever set foot in those waters again, the creature will be waiting. Not with curiosity or judgment, but with the cold efficiency of a guardian that has decided I have used up my second chance. So here's my question for you, and think about this carefully before you answer in the comments. If you discovered something valuable, something that could change your life, but you knew it was protected by something ancient and powerful, would you have the wisdom to walk away? Or would greed and curiosity override your survival instincts? Because treasures like the copper in Lake Superior still exist, protected places still exist, and the spirits that guard them are patient. They have waited for thousands of years. They can wait for you too. Just remember that being allowed to leave once does not mean you get a third chance. Some warnings are final, and some guardians never forget a face. Story 4. Ship that never sinks. I saw the burning ship 3 nights ago off the coast of Prince Edward Island, and now I understand why sailors have been disappearing from these waters for over 200 years. My name is Jack Morrison. I am a commercial fisherman from Massachusetts, 46 years old, been working the Atlantic my entire adult life. I know boats. I know the ocean. I know what is real and what is fisherman, is tales told over too much whiskey. What I saw in the Northumberland Strait wasn't detail. It was real. It is still out there, and it was looking for crew. The job came through a contact in New Brunswick. A fishing company needed an experienced captain to run tuna lines for 3 weeks. Good money, remote location, my kind of work. I drove up in early November, met the boat in Shediac, and headed out into the strait between New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island. The local crew was quiet, reserved in that way maritime people can be with outsiders. But on the second night, after a decent catch, the first mate opened up over coffee. Asked me if I knew about the Phantom ship. I said I heard stories. Every coast has ghost ship legends. He shook his head, said this was different. This one was real. Hundreds of sightings going back to the early 1800s. A ship engulfed in flames sailing through the strait. Always at night. Always visible from shore. Always bringing storms or bad luck or worse. I laughed it off, asked if he'd seen it personally. He went quiet, stared into his coffee, finally said his uncle had seen it in 1987. Watched it sail past for 20 minutes. Completely ablaze but never burning down. Never sinking. Just moving steadily through the water like the fire was part of it. A week later, his uncle's fishing boat went down in calm seas. No explanation. No survivors except his uncle, who was never quite right after. Stopped fishing. Stopped going near the water. Died young of a heart attack. But his wife said he'd been dying since the night he saw that ship. The first mate told me if I saw the burning ship, I should turn around immediately. Head for port. Dawn. To watch it. Dawn. To try to approach it. And definitely dawn. To respond if it signals. Because the ship wasn't just a ghost. It was hunting. Looking for crew to replace the ones who burned centuries ago. And anyone who got too close might find themselves part of its endless voyage. I went to sleep that night thinking about campfire stories and superstitious fishermen. Woke up at 2 a.m. to the smell of smoke. I rushed on deck expecting engine fire. Equipment malfunction. Some rational emergency. But the air was clear. No smoke visible. Just that smell. Thick, acrid, burning wood and tar and something else. Something that reminded me of the time I'd seen a house fire with people still inside. Then I saw the light. Off the starboard side, maybe a mile away, a ship was burning. Completely engulfed in flames. Masts ablaze. Sails on fire. Every inch of the vessel wrapped in orange and red light. But it wasn't sinking. It was sailing. Moving steadily southwest through the strait with full sails despite being entirely consumed by fire. I grabbed binoculars. Through the lenses, I could see details that made my hands shake. The ship was old, 18th or 19th century design. 3-masted schooner, and there were figures on deck. Shadows moving through the flames. Human shapes going about ship duties. Climbing rigging, working lines, acting like the fire didn't exist. The entire crew was watching now. Silent. The first mate crossed himself. One of the younger guys was crying. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. We just stood there watching this impossible thing sail through our reality. Then the burning ship changed course. Turned directly toward us. The first mate snapped into action. Started the engines. Told everyone to prepare to move. But our boat wouldn't start. The engines turned over but wouldn't catch. Again and again. Nothing. Like something was preventing ignition. The burning ship kept coming. Getting closer. The smell of smoke intensified. The temperature on deck increased noticeably despite the November cold. At half a mile distance, I could see the figures more clearly. They were charred, blackened, but still moving with purpose and coordination. And they were all looking at us. Every figure on that burning deck had turned to face our boat. Watching, waiting, the first mate was praying in French. The engine still wouldn't start. The burning ship was maybe 300 yards away now. Close enough that I could feel the heat. See individual faces in the flames. Mouths open like they were screaming but no sound coming out. Just silent figures trapped in eternal fire reaching toward us. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the ship changed course again. Turned away. Resumed its southwestern heading. Within minutes it had passed us. Within an hour it had disappeared beyond the horizon. That impossible orange glow fading into darkness. Our engine started immediately after it was gone. Nobody slept that night. We sat in the galley drinking coffee and not talking about what we'd seen. What could we say? We all witnessed the same impossible thing. A burning ship that defied physics and reason and everything we knew about the world. At dawn, the first mate told me he was done. Quitting. The rest of the crew agreed. They'd take their pay for 2 days and leave. I could stay if I wanted, but they were going ashore and never coming back. The Phantom ship had been seen. That meant bad luck was coming. Deaths, Disappearances. They wanted no part of it. I told them I'd stay. Finish the contract. I survived seeing the ship. Nothing bad had happened except a scare. I needed the money, and I'd come too far to quit over a strange sighting that probably had some rational explanation I just hadn't figured out yet. They left that morning, took the tender to shore. I was alone on the boat by noon. I should have gone with them. That night, the ship came back. Closer this time. Close enough that I could hear it. Not the sound of fire. Not the crackle of burning wood. But singing. Faint, distant. A sea shanty in a language I didn't recognize. Multiple voices in rough harmony. The sound of men working together on a long voyage. And the ship was signaling. A lantern on the stern flashing in a pattern. Morse code maybe, or some older system. 3 short flashes, 2 long, 3 short, over and over, like it was trying to communicate, trying to send a message. Every instinct told me to ignore it. Start the engines, get to port, but I couldn't, to look away. The ship was beautiful despite the flames. Majestic. And those figures on deck were becoming clearer, more defined. I could see their faces now. Could see their eyes. And they were looking directly at me. Not just watching, beckoning, arms outstretched, inviting me to join them. I found myself walking toward the side of my boat, toward the rail, toward the burning ship that was now maybe 100 yards away. The heat was intense, paint blistering on my boat, its hull, but I kept moving forward, drawn by something I couldn't name, a pull I couldn't resist. Part of me understood what was happening. This was how it worked, how the ship recruited. It showed itself, it called, and people came, willingly or not. They rowed out to the burning ship, climbed aboard, and became part of the crew, part of the fire, part of the eternal voyage. I was at the rail, hand on the ladder leading down to the tender. One more step and I'd be rowing toward that burning vessel, joining those charred figures, becoming another shadow working the rigging forever. Then my phone rang. The sound broke the spell, snapped me back to reality. I stumbled away from the rail, gasping, handshaking as I answered. It was my daughter, calling to check in. Just a normal conversation. How was the trip? When was I coming home? Did I remember her birthday was next week? I could barely speak, barely form words, but hearing her voice grounded me, reminded me what was real, what mattered, what I had to lose. When I looked back at the water, the burning ship was gone. Just empty, straight, and darkness. No light, no figures, no singing, like it had never been there. But I could still smell the smoke, still feel the heat on my skin. And when I looked at my hands, they were blistered. Second-degree burns on my palms and forearms from heat that should have been impossible at that distance. I started the engines and headed for port. Made it to Shediac by dawn. Went straight to the hospital for my burns. The doctors asked what happened. I told them equipment malfunction. Hot oil. They didn't believe me, but they patched me up and let me go. I found the first mate at a bar near the harbor. He took one look at my bandaged hands and closed his eyes. Asked if I'd gone toward it. I said almost. He told me I was lucky. Most people who get that close to come back. They row out to the burning ship and are never seen again. Sometimes their boats are found empty. Sometimes their boats disappear too. But they re-gone, added to the crew, sailing forever through the strait in flames. He told me the history he knew. The phantom ship first appeared in the early 1800s. A real ship called the Colchester had burned in the strait in 1804. The crew had died, but sightings of a burning ship started a decade later. Descriptions matched the Colchester perfectly. Hundreds of reports over 2 centuries. Always the same details. Full flames, moving under sail, figures on deck. It had become a legend. A tourist attraction almost. People took boat tours hoping to see it, but fishermen knew better. They knew about the disappearances that followed sightings, about boats that went missing in calm weather, about experienced sailors who rowed out alone at night and never returned. The authorities called them accidents, drownings. The fishing community knew it was the ship, collecting crew, building its numbers. I asked why. Why would a ghost ship need crew? The first mate didn't have an answer. Said some believed it was cursed to sail forever and needed souls to maintain it. Others thought the original crew was trapped and trying to escape by recruiting replacements. A few believed it wasn't a ghost at all, but something older. Something that had always been in these waters. Something that took the form of a burning ship because that's what sailors feared and understood. I left Canada the next day, drove back to Massachusetts, told the fishing company I was done. Forfeited my pay, didn't care. I just needed to be away from those waters. Away from the strait, away from the thing that wore the shape of a burning ship. But it followed me. 3 nights ago, I saw it off the coast of Gloucester. Impossible. The Phantom ship was hundreds of miles north, bound to the Northumberland Strait by legend and history. It shouldn't exist in Massachusetts waters. But there it was, that same orange glow on the horizon, that same sense of wrongness, that same pull. I didn't go toward it, stayed inside, locked my doors, but I watched from my window as it sailed past. And I saw something new. The crew had grown, more figures on deck, more shadows working through the flames, and some of them looked recent. Modern clothing, contemporary builds, new additions to the eternal crew. Last night it came closer, anchored a mile offshore. I could see it clearly from my house, could smell the smoke even through closed windows. And I heard knocking, not on my door, on the hull of every boat in the harbor, like something was testing them, checking for seaworthiness, choosing which one to claim next. Other fishermen heard it too. This morning the harbor was buzzing with confused reports. Nobody could explain the sound. The harbormaster blamed thermal expansion, metal contracting in the cold. But I knew better. The ship was expanding its territory. The Northumberland Strait wasn't enough anymore. It was spreading down the coast, looking for new waters, new crew, and I think I know why. I researched everything I could find about the Phantom ship, found one detail that keeps appearing in historical accounts. Every few decades, there surge in sightings. The ship appears more frequently, gets more aggressive, more people disappear. Then it goes quiet for years. The pattern suggests it's not random. It is cyclical, building to something. The last surge was in the 1970s. 15 disappearances in 5 years. Then the sightings dropped off, became rare again. Now it's been over 40 years. Long enough for the cycle to repeat. And this time it's not staying in Canadian waters. It's ranging further, looking for more crew. Maybe because it needs more. Maybe because whatever powers it is getting stronger. I found one more thing. An old journal entry from 1823. A sailor who claimed to have escaped the burning ship. He wrote that he'd been lured aboard, had joined the crew, worked the rigging in flames that didn't consume him but never stopped burning. He sailed with them for what felt like years, but was only one night. And he learned the truth. The ship wasn't cursed. It was a prison. Something had been bound there centuries ago. Something that fed on souls and suffering. The original crew hadn't died in the fire. They'd been taken, transformed into wardens for this thing. And every new soul it claimed made it stronger, made its prison weaker. Eventually, if it collected enough, it would break free, become unbound, able to go anywhere, take anyone. The sailor had escaped by jumping overboard as the ship passed close to shore. He nearly drowned, had permanent burns, but he survived. And he spent the rest of his life warning people. Nobody believed him. They thought he'd gone mad from too much time at sea. I believed him, because I felt that pull, felt that thing calling me. And I barely resisted. Next time I might not be strong enough. The ship is out there right now. I can see the glow from my window. It's closer than last night. The singing is audible even inside my house. That rough harmony, that working song, and underneath it, something else. A rhythm, a pulse, like a heartbeat, getting stronger, getting faster. My hands are blistering again. New burns forming without heat source. The smell of smoke is permanent now, soaked into my clothes, my skin, my lungs. I am being marked, claimed, slowly transformed into something that belongs on that burning deck. I tried to leave, drove inland, made it 50 miles before I fell asleep at the wheel. Woke up in a ditch facing east, toward the ocean, toward the ship. The pull is too strong. Distance doesn't matter anymore. So I'm making this recording, leaving evidence, because I know what is coming. Tonight or tomorrow or the night after, I'll walk down to the harbor, untie a boat, row out to that burning ship, climb aboard, join the crew, become another shadow working through eternal flames. I don't want to. God knows I don't want to. But the pull is overwhelming. The singing is constant. The fire is calling my name. And I am so tired of fighting. Here is what I need to know. And I am asking because maybe someone else is experiencing this too. If you saw a burning ship on the horizon, if you felt that impossible pull towards something, would destroy you, would you fight it until the end, or would you accept the inevitable? Would you row toward the flames or die trying to resist? Drop your answer in the comments, because in a few hours I'll be making that choice. And I honestly don't know which way I'll go. The Phantom ship of the Northumberland Strait ISN, to a legend. It is a prison, and it's breaking free one soul at a time. Every person who rows out to join that crew weakens the binding, feeds the thing inside, brings it closer to escape. If you ever see a burning ship on the horizon, dawn to watch it. Dawn to listen to it. Dawn to try to help. Just run. Get as far inland as you can. Because once it calls your name, once you feel that pull, you already claimed. The crew is waiting. The fire never stops burning. And the voyage never ends. I can see figures on the shore now, charred and dripping, walking toward my house. They come to collect me, to bring me home to the ship. I should run, should fight, but the singing is so beautiful. The fire looks so warm, and I'm so very tired of being afraid. Maybe it won't be so bad. Maybe the burning doesn't hurt after a while. Maybe sailing forever is better than dying slowly on land. Or maybe I'm already gone. Maybe I rode out 3 nights ago when I saw it off Gloucester. Maybe I'm part of the crew now. Maybe this recording is coming from the burning ship itself. A warning, a confession, a recruitment tool. Listen, can you hear it? That singing, that rhythm, that pulse, it's calling you to now. Because you heard the story. You imagined the ship. You thought about the flames. And that's enough. That is the hook. That is how it spreads. The phantom ship is real. It is coming, and it needs crew. Will you answer when it calls your name? Story 5. Thing that knocks the knocking started on the 3rd night, and it followed a pattern that no animal or wind could possibly make. I am a property inspector from Oregon, 42 years old. I have evaluated hundreds of remote structures, condemned buildings, and abandoned homesteads across the Pacific Northwest and Alaska. I understand structural sounds, the creak of settling timber, the groan of ice shifting on a roof, the scratch of mice in the walls. But what I experienced in that cabin on the Mackenzie River was not structural. It was intelligent, and it wanted me to know I was not alone. The assignment came through a real estate firm in Yellowknife. They had acquired a property along the Mackenzie River, a trapper's cabin built in the 1930s, and they needed a full inspection before listing it. The place had been empty for 3 years since the last owner disappeared. Local gossip said he just walked out one winter morning and never came back. They found his truck at the cabin, but no sign of him. No footprints leading away. No evidence of foul play. Just gone. The real estate agent told me the cabin had a reputation. Previous occupants had reported disturbances, objects moving, strange sounds, the feeling of being watched. Standard haunted house stuff that I dismissed as cabin fever and isolation playing tricks on people's minds. I had heard similar stories about dozens of remote properties. None of them had turned out to be anything more than overactive imaginations. I flew in by bush plane on a Monday in early October. The pilot dropped me on a gravel bar half a mile from the cabin and told me he would be back in 5 days. The Mackenzie was running low, exposing mudflats and sandbars, the water dark with sediment. The forest around the river was thick with spruce and birch, their leaves already gone, branches bare against a gray sky. The cabin was in better shape than I expected. Solid log construction, tin roof, a small porch facing the river. The door was unlocked. Inside was a single room, maybe 20 by 20 feet, wood stove in the corner, a table and 2 chairs, a narrow bed against one wall, shelves with canned goods and basic supplies. Everything neat and organized, as if the owner had just stepped out for a moment. I set up my equipment and started the inspection. Foundation was solid. No rot in the logs. Roof was tight. The stove worked. Structurally, the cabin was sound. But there was something wrong with the atmosphere. The air felt heavy, like before a thunderstorm, and the cabin was too quiet. No mice, no insects, no sounds of wildlife outside, just silence pressing against my eardrums. The first 2 nights were uneventful. I documented everything, took measurements, checked for water damage and pest infestations. I slept well enough, waking only once to the sound of the river and wind in the trees. Normal wilderness sounds. Then came the 3rd night. I was lying in the narrow bed, reading by flashlight, when I heard it. 3 sharp knocks on the wall beside my head. Loud, deliberate, spaced exactly 2 seconds apart. I sat up and put my hand on the log wall. Solid. No vibration, no indication that anything had struck it. I chalked it up to the wood settling in the cold and went back to reading. 10 minutes later it happened again. 3 knocks, same wall, same spacing. But this time I was watching the wall and I saw nothing that could have made that sound. No impact, no movement, just the sound itself, seeming to come from inside the wood. I got up and checked outside. Nothing, no animals, no branches touching the cabin. I went back inside and tried to sleep. The knocking came back at exactly 2 in the morning. I know because I checked my watch. But this time it was not on the wall. It was under the floor. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Moving across the cabin from one corner to another, as if something was crawling beneath the floorboards and announcing its presence. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside to check the crawl space. The cabin was built on posts, raised about 2 feet off the ground. I shone my light underneath. Nothing, just bare earth and the wooden joists supporting the floor. But when I put my ear to the ground, I could hear it. A scratching sound, something moving through the dirt. And then 3 knocks, so loud and so close that I jerked my head back and cracked it on a floor joist. I spent the rest of that night sitting at the table with every light in the cabin on, my hand on the bear spray I carry for wildlife encounters. The knocking continued until dawn, always in sets of 3, always moving, sometimes on the walls, sometimes under the floor, once, terrifyingly, on the underside of the tin roof, as if something was up there tapping out a message. When the sun came up, the sound stopped. I went outside and examined every inch of the cabin exterior. No marks, no signs of disturbance. The roof was clear. The walls were solid. Whatever was making that sound left no physical evidence of its presence. I should have called for early extraction. Should have radioed the pilot and told him to pick me up immediately. But I had a job to finish. And I was angry. Angry at myself for being scared. Angry at the situation for being inexplicable. So I decided to stay and document whatever was happening. I set up my video camera that evening, positioned to capture the main room and the walls where the knocking had been loudest. I also placed a digital audio recorder on the table set to capture any sounds during the night. Then I tried to sleep. The knocking started at midnight. Exactly midnight. I watched the video screen as it happened. 3 knocks on the wall behind my bed. The camera showed the wall clearly. Nothing touched it, but the sound was unmistakable, captured by the audio recorder with perfect clarity. Then the knocking moved, to the wall by the stove, then to the floor under the table, then to the ceiling. It was circling the cabin, spiraling inward, getting closer to where I lay frozen in the bed. And then it stopped. Complete silence. I held my breath, listening, watching the camera screen. Nothing moved, no sound, just the awful weight of expectation, the certainty that something was about to happen. That was when the table moved. I watched it on the camera screen. The table lifted 6 inches off the floor, hung there for 3 seconds, then dropped with a bang that shook the entire cabin. The 2 chairs followed, rising and falling in sequence. Then the shelf unit tore free from the wall and crashed to the floor, spilling canned goods across the room. I was out of the bed and at the door before I realized I was moving. But when I grabbed the handle, it would not turn. The door was locked from the inside, but the lock mechanism was not engaged. Something was holding it shut. I pulled with all my strength. Nothing. The door would not budge. Behind me, I heard the scraping of wood on wood. I turned and saw the bed sliding across the floor toward me, pushed by nothing, moving with deliberate intent. I pressed myself against the door, trapped, as the bed pinned me there. Then the knocking started again. But this time it was not on the walls or floor. It was inside my head. 3 knocks resonating through my skull like someone was rapping on the inside of my brain. And with each knock came a feeling. Not words but emotions and images. Anger, territorial rage, the sense of something that had been here long before the cabin was built and resented every human who dared to occupy this space. The pressure in my head built until I thought my skull would crack. I could feel blood running from my nose. My vision went gray at the edges. And just when I thought I would pass out, everything stopped. The bed slid backward. The door handle turned freely in my hand. And the knocking ceased. I was outside and running before I could think. I splashed through the shallows of the river, climbed the far bank, and did not stop until I was a quarter mile away. I spent the rest of the night sitting on a log, shivering, watching the cabin across the water. When dawn came, I went back. I had to. My equipment was there. My documentation, my satellite phone. The cabin looked normal in the morning light, almost welcoming. But when I opened the door, I saw the destruction. The table was split down the middle. The chairs were broken into pieces. The shelf unit was reduced to kindling. And on every wall, scratched deep into the wood, were symbols. Not letters or pictures, but geometric patterns that hurt to look at, angles that seemed wrong, lines that appeared to move when I was not looking directly at them. I grabbed my gear and left. I hiked downstream to the gravel bar and activated my emergency beacon. The pilot arrived 8 hours later. He took one look at my face and asked no questions. We flew back to Yellowknife in silence. I wrote my report. Structural sound but not habitable due to evidence of severe pest infestation and possible geological instability causing structural vibrations. I did not mention the poltergeist. Did not include the video or audio recordings. I kept those for myself. The real estate firm sold the property to a developer who planned to tear down the cabin and build a fishing line. They started demolition last month. The crew quit after 3 days. They reported the same things. Knocking, objects moving, the feeling of being watched by something hostile and invisible. The project was abandoned. The cabin still stands on the Mackenzie River. Empty, waiting, and whatever lives there, whatever ancient presence occupies that space, is still knocking. Still announcing its territory. Still warning anyone who enters that they are trespassing on ground that belongs to something older and stronger than human ownership. I have the recordings. I have listened to them once. The knocking is clear, but there is something else underneath it. A voice maybe, or the suggestion of a voice, speaking in a language that predates any human tongue. And the tone is unmistakable. It is not asking. It is not pleading. It is commanding, ordering intruders to leave, to never return. I will never go back to that cabin. But I think about it often, about what it means that a place can be claimed by something other than legal deed or human habitation. About the possibility that some locations carry spirits or energies or presences that refuse to be displaced no matter how many years pass. The Mackenzie River has been there for thousands of years, and what lives in that cabin has probably been there just as long, tolerating human visitors when they show respect, driving them out when they stay too long. I was warned. The knocking was a warning, and I was allowed to leave because I finally understood and fled. But others have not been so lucky. The owner who disappeared, the workers who quit. How many others over the decades have heard that knocking and not recognized it for what it was? A territorial claim, a threat, a promise of what will happen if you do not leave. So here's my question for you. Have you ever been in a place that felt wrong? Where the walls seemed to watch you and the silence was too heavy and you knew, absolutely knew, that you were not welcome? Did you listen to that instinct? Or did you stay, telling yourself it was all in your head, right up until something proved you wrong? Write your answer in the comments. But be careful, because acknowledging these presences, admitting they exist, might be enough to draw their attention. And once something like that notices you, distance does not matter. Walls do not matter. It will find a way to knock. Story 6. What crawls in the dark? I heard the dragging sound in the flooded mines beneath Cape Breton 5 days ago, and whatever made it has followed me back to the surface. My name is Derek Walsh. I am an environmental engineer from Pittsburgh, 44 years old, specialize in assessing contamination in abandoned industrial sites. Last week I took a contract in Sydney Mines, Nova Scotia, evaluating old coal shafts for potential remediation. Standard job, underground surveys, water testing, document the damage and file a report. I've done 100 similar assessments, but I've never encountered anything like what is in those tunnels. And now it is in my hotel room, in the walls, getting closer every night. The mine complex extends for miles beneath Cape Breton, flooded in the 70s after the coal industry collapsed. Hundreds of shafts and passages now filled with black water that hasn't seen sunlight in 50 years. The company hired me to check structural integrity and contamination levels before deciding whether to pump them out or seal them permanently. My local guide was a guy named Peter, mid-60s, former miner who worked these shafts before they flooded. He knew every tunnel, every access point, but when we met at the first site, he seemed nervous. Kept checking his watch like he wanted to finish quickly and leave. He told me the locals avoided these mines, not just because they were dangerous, because of stories. He called it the crawler, said it lived in the flooded sections, something that had been down there since before the mines closed. Maybe longer. Miners used to hear it, a wet dragging sound moving through the darkness, and occasionally they see it, pale, thin, moving wrong, like it had too many joints or joints in the wrong places. I asked if anyone had ever gotten a clear look. He shook his head, said the ones who got close enough to see details didn't come back out, or came back changed, traumatized, refusing to talk about what they'd seen. One miner in 1968 had lasted 3 days in psychiatric care before dying of what the official report called a heart attack. But Peter said the man had clawed his own throat open, said he could feel it crawling inside him, said it had gotten in through his eyes. I told Peter the first appreciated the local color, but I needed to do my job. He nodded, said he'd take me to the access points, but he wouldn't to go below the waterline. That was my choice. He'd wait topside with the radio and haul me up if I called. But once I went under, I was on my own. The first descent was routine. Old shaft, rusty ladder, water level about 40 feet down. I wore a full dry suit with helmet cam and multiple lights, carried water testing equipment and a depth sounder. The water was cold and completely opaque, black as oil, visibility zero even with high-powered lights. I had to navigate by touch and sonar. The silence underwater was absolute. No sound except my breathing and the occasional ping of the sounder. I checked the walls, took samples, documented structural damage. Everything normal, professional, safe. Then I heard it, a dragging sound, slow, rhythmic, coming from somewhere in the flooded tunnel ahead of me, like something heavy being pulled across rough stone. I froze, listened. The sound continued for maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. I told myself it was water movement, debris shifting, old timber settling, but the sound had been deliberate, purposeful, not random environmental noise. I continued working, took more samples, but I kept hearing it. Always in the distance, always just at the edge of perception. That wet dragging, sometimes it sounded like it was getting closer. Sometimes it seemed to come from multiple directions at once. I cut the dive short, surfaced, told Peter the First, he'd gotten what I needed from that shaft. He asked if I heard anything. I said no, Don. Do you know why I lied? Maybe I didn't want to admit I'd been unnerved. Maybe I didn't want him to be right about the stories. The second site was deeper, a main shaft that connected to multiple passages. The water here was over 100 feet down. I need to go deeper, stay longer. Peter was even more nervous at this location. Said this was where most of the incidents had happened, where miners had seen the crawler most often, where 2 men had disappeared in 1971, 3 days before the final evacuation and flooding. I descended slowly. The shaft opened into a larger space at depth, a junction where multiple tunnels converged. My lights barely penetrated the darkness. The water was thicker here, more sediment, like a black fog that absorbed light, and the dragging sound was louder, closer, more distinct. I could hear it moving through the tunnels, circling me. That slow, deliberate drag. Pause, drag, pause, like something pulling itself along using only its upper body. Something that didn't walk normally, didn't swim, just dragged. Then I saw movement in my peripheral vision. Something pale passing through the beam of my side light. Too quick to identify, but definitely there, definitely moving with purpose. I spun around. Nothing, just dark water and the edge of the tunnel disappearing into blackness. The dragging sound was right behind me now. I turned again, saw it clearly for just a second before my brain refused to process what I was seeing. Pale skin, elongated limbs, a body that was too thin and too long, arms that bent in too many places, and a face that was mostly mouth. Wide, unnaturally wide, opened in what might have been a grin or might have been permanent damage. Then it lunged. I kicked backward, slammed into the shaft wall. My lights spun wildly. When they steadied, the thing was gone. But I could hear it moving, circling, multiple dragging sounds now, like there was more than one. Or it could split itself. Or I was losing my mind in the sensory deprivation of that black water. I surfaced faster than safety protocols allowed. Didn't care about decompression. Just needed out. Needed air. Needed light. Peter hauled me up the final stretch. Asked what happened. I told him equipment malfunction. Had to abort. He looked at my face and knew I was lying, but didn't press. I should have quit then. Should have told the company I couldn't complete the assessment. But I'm stubborn and practical, and I convinced myself. I panicked over nothing. Saw debris or fish or my own equipment and let Peter's stories contaminate my perception. I went back the next day. Different shaft, shallower water, better visibility. I proved to myself there was nothing down there except old coal tunnels and groundwater. This time I went deeper into the passage, followed it away from the main shaft into a narrower section. The walls here were smooth, worn, not from mining equipment, from something moving through repeatedly, something that had polished the stone over years, decades, longer, and the dragging sound was everywhere. Ahead, behind, above, below, surrounding me in that black water. Getting faster, more aggressive, like it was excited, like it had been waiting for me to come back. I felt something brush against my leg. Light touch, exploratory, testing. I jerked away, spun around, saw nothing, but the water movement said something had just passed. Something big enough to create a wake. Then I felt it grab my ankle. The grip was strong, cold, wrong. Fingers that were too long and had too many segments. Wrapping around my leg, squeezing, pulling me deeper into the passage. Away from the shaft, away from escape. I kicked, hard, connected with something solid but yielding, like kicking a body that had been underwater too long. The grip released. I swam as fast as the dry suit allowed, burst through the surface, climbed the ladder without waiting for Peter's help. Didn't stop until I was out of the shaft building. Out in daylight, out where things made sense. My ankle had bruises, long finger marks, 4 fingers, but they were in the wrong positions. Spread too wide, like whatever grabbed me had a hand structure that didn't match human anatomy. Peter saw the marks, told me I was done, that I needed to leave Cape Breton, that the crawler had touched me, had my scent now, that it would follow, that it always followed once it marked someone. I told him that was insane. I'd been grabbed by something, some animal that had gotten into the flooded mines, maybe a seal or large eel. Nothing supernatural, nothing that could follow me on land. He shook his head, said it wasn't an animal, that miners had been trying to explain the crawler for a century, that whatever it was, it had been in those mines before humans arrived, that the coal extraction had disturbed it, trapped it when the shafts flooded, and now it took anyone who came too close, added them to itself, absorbed them. The disappearances weren't deaths. They were incorporations. I left that afternoon, told the company I couldn't complete the assessment due to safety concerns. They weren't happy, but they paid me for the day's work. I drove to the airport, flew home to Pittsburgh, tried to forget about the mines and the dragging sound and the thing that had grabbed my ankle. But it followed. The first night back, I heard it in my apartment. That same wet dragging, coming from inside the walls, moving through the building, circling my bedroom. I searched everywhere. Nothing, just the sound, always just out of sight. The second night, I saw it, just for a moment, reflected in my bathroom mirror. Something pale and elongated pressed against the wall behind me. When I turned, nothing was there, but I could see wet marks on the wallpaper, long streaks like something had been dragging itself across the surface. The third night, it got into my bed. I woke to weight pressing down on me, that same cold grip on my leg. Moving up, those wrong hands exploring, searching for something. I thrashed, turned on the lights, nothing visible, but the blankets were soaked. Black water, the same water from the mines, pooling on my sheets. I am on the 5th night now. Haven, slept in 2 days. The dragging sound is constant. The wet marks are everywhere. My apartment walls, my car interior, my office. It is spreading, following me, getting bolder. And I think I understand what Peter meant about being absorbed, because I'm seeing things differently now. The darkness looks deeper, more inviting. I catch myself wanting to go back to the mines, to descend into that black water, to find the crawler and let it take me, join it, become part of whatever it is. The urge is getting stronger. I dream about the tunnels, about dragging myself through flooded passages, about my body elongating, joints multiplying, mouth widening, becoming something that belongs in that darkness. I researched the mine history, found records of similar incidents going back to the 1880s. Miners who changed after working deep sections, who became withdrawn, stopped talking, eventually disappeared. Some walked into the ocean. Some went back into the mines and never came out. A few killed themselves. All describe the same progression. The dragging sounds, the wet marks, the urge to return underground. There is a theory in the historical records, never officially documented but whispered among mining families, that something lived in the rock long before humans dug into it. Something ancient, something that had been sealed in the coal seams. That mining released it, gave it access, and when the mines flooded, it thrived, adapted, learned to hunt, and anyone who disturbed its territory became marked, claimed, slowly transformed into another crawler, another servant, another piece of its growing network beneath Cape Breton. I found one more thing, a journal entry from 1969. A miner describing his friend, his change after encountering the crawler. Said his friend, his fingers started lengthening, bones restructuring, joints appearing where they shouldn't, and his friend said it didn't. It hurt. Said it felt right, natural, like he was finally becoming what he was always meant to be. I looked at my hands this morning. My fingers are longer, just slightly, barely noticeable, but definitely changed. And my joints ache, not painfully, just a pressure, like something inside wants to push through, create new articulation points, make me more flexible, better suited for narrow tunnels and black water. The dragging sound is in the room with me now. I can't see it, but I know it is here, waiting, patient, and I am not afraid anymore, just curious, just ready, because I understand now, the crawler ISN Tea hunting. It is recruiting, building, growing its presence one person at a time. And everyone it touches eventually joins it. Eventually goes back to the mines, back to the darkness, back to where they belong. They booked a flight to Nova Scotia. Leave tomorrow. I am going back to the mines, back to the flooded shafts. And I am going to descend, going to find the crawler, going to let it finish whatever process it started when it grabbed my ankle. Part of me knows this is wrong, knows I am being influenced, controlled, transformed into something inhuman, but a larger part doesn't care, wants this, craves the darkness and the cold water and the endless tunnels, feels like going home. So here, it's my question for you, and I need you to really think about this because it might matter. If you felt yourself changing into something else, if you felt drawn to a place you knew was dangerous, would you fight it or would you accept the transformation? Would you resist becoming a monster or would you embrace what you re-becoming? Drop your answer in the comments, because in 24 hours I'll be in those mines. I'll be in that black water, and I'll either die human or survive as something else. The crawler is real. It lives in the flooded coal mines beneath Cape Breton, and it is always looking for new additions, new fingers to drag itself through the tunnels, new mouths to open wide in the darkness. If you ever work in abandoned mines, if you ever hear dragging sounds in the water, Don, to investigate. Don, to get close. Don, let it touch you. Because once it marks you, once it starts to change, there is no stopping it. You will go back. You will descend. You will become part of it. I can feel my joints separating as I write this, can feel new segments forming. My mouth aches, jaw loosening, widening, getting ready for whatever it needs to do in the tunnels. The dragging sound is right behind me. I am not going to turn around. I already know what I'll see. Already know it. It's me, the future me, the thing I am becoming. Come back from tomorrow to make sure I complete the journey. The mines are waiting, the water is calling, and the crawler needs more hands to pull itself through the darkness. I'll see you in the tunnels. Maybe you'll hear me dragging. Maybe you'll feel my fingers on your ankle. Maybe you'll join us. The darkness is patient, and the coal mines go deeper than anyone knows. Story 7. Night the Donnellys died. I need to tell you what happened when I spent a night camping on the ruins of the Donnelly homestead near Lucan, Ontario. And why I now understand that some violence is so extreme it permanently scars the land where it occurred. The screaming started at 2:17 in the morning. Not modern screams, not the kind of sound people make today. These were raw, animal sounds of pure terror mixed with rage. The sounds human beings make when they know they are about to die. They came from the foundation stones of the burned farmhouse where I had pitched my tent, rising from the ground itself like the earth was replaying a recording from February 4th, 1880. And when the screaming finally stopped and I heard the wet sounds of impact, of metal on flesh, of bodies hitting dirt, I understood that what happened to the Donnelly family had never really ended. It was still happening, over and over, trapped in a loop of violence that refused to fade. My name is Jake. I am a history teacher from Michigan, and last summer I spent 3 weeks traveling through Ontario researching historical sites for a book I was writing about Irish immigration to North America. The Donnelly Massacre was one of the most infamous events in Canadian history. An entire family murdered by their neighbors in a single night. 5 people dead, a farmhouse burned to the ground, and despite dozens of witnesses, no one was ever convicted. The story had everything: feuds, revenge, vigilante justice, and a community conspiracy of silence that lasted generations. I arrived in Lucan on a humid July afternoon. The town was small and quiet, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and strangers are noticed. I stopped at the local museum first, a modest building on the main street that had an entire room dedicated to the Donnelly tragedy. Old photographs, newspaper clippings, artifacts supposedly recovered from the burned farmhouse. The curator, an elderly woman named Margaret, was happy to talk about the history but became noticeably uncomfortable when I mentioned wanting to visit the actual site. She told me the property was private land, that nothing remained except foundation stones and overgrown fields. She said most locals avoided the place, that it had a bad reputation. When I pressed her on what she meant, she looked at me with an expression I could not quite read and said that some events are too terrible to ever truly be over. That the land remembers. That people who spent time at the old Donnelly farm often reported strange experiences. Voices, sounds of struggle, the smell of smoke even on clear days. I thanked her for the information and drove out to the site anyway. The old Donnelly property was about 5 miles north of town on a rural road that saw little traffic. A rusted historical marker identified the location, but there was no parking area, no maintained path. Just fields and scattered trees and, if you looked carefully, the outline of old foundation stones barely visible through the tall grass. I parked on the shoulder and walked in. The sun was still high, but the air felt different here. Heavier, the birds were quiet, even the insects seemed subdued. The foundation was larger than I expected, maybe 40 feet long and 30 feet wide, rectangular stones forming the outline of what had been the Donnelly family home. In the center, I could still see darkened earth where the main structure had stood before the mob set it ablaze with the family trapped inside. I spent the afternoon taking notes and photographs, documenting the site. The plan was to camp overnight, to get a feel for the place, to imagine what it must have been like that winter night in 1880 when 30 men with weapons surrounded this farmhouse and murdered everyone inside. I was a historian. I wanted to understand. I wanted to connect with the past in a meaningful way. As the sun set, I pitched my small tent inside the foundation, right where I estimated the main room would have been. I built a small fire outside the tent for light and warmth, ate a simple dinner, and reviewed my notes on the massacre. The Donnelly family had been Irish immigrants, tough and stubborn, who had settled this land in the 1840s. They had feuds with neighbors over property lines and cattle. They had a reputation for being difficult, sometimes violent, but nothing justified what happened on that February night. According to the historical accounts, a vigilance committee formed by local residents had decided the Donnellys needed to be eliminated. Around midnight, the mob arrived at the farm. They broke down the door. Inside were James and Johanna Donnelly, both in their 60s, along with their son Tom and niece Bridget. The mob beat them to death with weapons and farm implements. Then they set the house on fire and left. A fifth family member, John Donnelly, lived in a nearby property and was killed there the same night. Only one person, a young boy visiting the family, survived by hiding. His testimony described the horror in detail. The trial that followed acquitted the accused. The community closed ranks. The Donnellys were blamed for their own deaths. I sat by my fire thinking about this injustice, about how entire communities could participate in murder and face no consequences. Around 11, I extinguished the fire and crawled into my tent. The night was warm but not uncomfortable. I could hear the wind moving through the distant trees, the occasional call of an owl. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds. I fell asleep easily. The screaming woke me at 2:17. I know the exact time because I checked my phone, my heart already racing before I was fully conscious. The sound was coming from multiple directions at once, surrounding my tent. Men shouting, women shrieking, the unmistakable sounds of violence and terror. I unzipped my tent and looked out. The foundation was empty. No people, no fire, just darkness and the shapes of stones and grass. But the sounds continued, so loud and clear I could make out individual voices. A woman begging for mercy. A man cursing. The heavy impacts of something solid hitting flesh. And underneath it all, a strange crackling that took me several seconds to recognize. Fire. I could hear fire consuming wood, even though I saw none. I grabbed my flashlight and swept it across the foundation. Nothing, but the sounds were intensifying. More screaming, more impacts, and now I could smell smoke, thick and acrid, the smell of burning wood and something worse. Burning cloth, burning hair, the smell that would have filled this space when the mob set the farmhouse ablaze with the Donnellys dying inside. I should have run to my car and left. Every instinct screamed at me to get away from this place, but I was frozen, trapped between my rational mind insisting this could not be real and my senses reporting something impossible. The sounds were not coming from speakers or people hiding in the darkness. They were coming from the earth itself, from the stones, from the air. The past was bleeding through into the present, and I was experiencing the massacre as if I was there the night it happened. Then the sounds changed. The screaming intensified to a pitch that made my teeth ache. The crackling of flames grew to a roar, and through the chaos, I heard new sounds. Laughter. The mob was laughing, celebrating, making jokes while a family burned alive just feet away. The depravity of it, the pure evil, was more terrifying than any ghost or monster could ever be. These were normal people, neighbors, church members, committing an atrocity and enjoying it. The sounds reached a crescendo and then cut off abruptly. Total silence. Not even wind, not even insects. The smell of smoke lingered. I stood there in the darkness, my flashlight shaking in my hand. and heard something new. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, approaching from the direction of where the front door would have been. Something was walking toward my tent. I pointed my flashlight at the sound. The beam showed nothing. Empty foundation, grass, stones. But the footsteps continued, closer now, accompanied by a wet dragging sound like something being pulled across dirt. They stopped directly in front of my tent, maybe 3 feet away. I could hear breathing, ragged and painful, like someone with damaged lungs struggling for air. Then a voice spoke, clear and distinct despite sounding muffled, as if coming through water a great distance. It asked why I was here, what I wanted. The voice was male, older, with an accent I recognized from historical recordings. Irish, rural, 19th century. This was not my imagination. This was not an audio trick. Something was speaking to me in a voice that should not exist. I could not answer. My throat had closed with fear. The breathing continued for several long seconds. Then the voice spoke again. It said the land was cursed. That what happened here was so wrong it had poisoned the ground. That the dead could not rest because justice had never come. That I should leave and never return and tell others to stay away because this place belonged to the murdered now. And the murdered had no kindness left for the living. The presence withdrew. I heard the footsteps and dragging sounds moving away, fading into the darkness. The normal night sounds returned. Wind, insects, distant animals. But I could still smell smoke. And when I checked my tent, I found something that made my blood run cold. Soot, black soot covering the outside of my tent in handprint shapes. 5 distinct prints, each different, each marking where someone had touched the fabric. But I had been inside the tent the entire time. No one could have approached without me seeing or hearing them. Yet these prints were fresh, the soot still slightly damp, leaving stains when I touched them. I packed up in the darkness, working as fast as my shaking hands allowed. I did not bother with organization or care. I just threw everything in my car and drove back to Lucan. At a gas station on the edge of town, I sat under the fluorescent lights and tried to process what had happened. The rational explanations fell apart under scrutiny. No one had been at the site. No sound system could reproduce what I had heard. No prankster could leave handprints on my tent while I was inside it. I checked into a motel and spent the rest of the night researching. What I found confirmed my experience was not unique. For over a century, people had reported similar encounters at the old Donnelly farm. Screaming at night, sounds of violence, the smell of smoke, apparitions of figures in old-fashioned clothing, voices speaking in Irish accents. Every account described the same pattern, the massacre replaying itself, the dead trying to communicate, the overwhelming sense of injustice and rage that pervaded the location. But one detail appeared in multiple accounts that I had not known before. The handprints. Several people reported finding sooty handprints on their vehicles or belongings after visiting the site. Always 5 prints, one for each Donnelly family member who died that night. The prints were considered a warning, a message from the dead that this place was not for the living, that the Donnellys claimed this ground as their own, bound to it by the violence that had ended their lives. I left Ontario the next day. I never finished my book. How could I? How do you write history when the past refuses to stay past? When the dead are still experiencing their deaths over and over, trapped in the moment of their murder? The Donnelly massacre was not just a historical event. It was an ongoing trauma, a wound in reality that continued to bleed. The site still stands north of Lucan. The foundation stones are still there. The fields are still empty except for grass and memories. And on certain nights, especially in February near the anniversary of the massacre, locals report hearing the sounds again. The screaming, the violence, the crackling flames. Some say it is getting worse, that the haunting is intensifying as if the Donnellys are becoming more desperate to be heard, to have their story acknowledged, to receive the justice that was denied them in life. I think about them often, about James and Johanna, trying to defend their home, about Tom and Bridget, dying alongside them, about John, murdered in his own house nearby, about the community that killed them and faced no consequences, about how evil can flourish when good people choose silence over justice. And I think about those handprints on my tent, 5 distinct marks, 5 people saying we are still here, we still remember, we will never forget what was done to us. So here's my question for you, and I want you to really think about it. If you were murdered along with your family by people who were never punished, if the community that killed you covered it up and went on living normal lives while you rotted in the ground, would you be able to rest? Or would your rage and pain be so intense that it would keep you trapped, reliving your death forever, hoping that someday someone would finally acknowledge the injustice and give you peace? Write your answer in the comments, because I need to understand if the Donnellys can ever be freed from that night, or if some wrongs are so terrible that they echo through eternity with no hope of resolution. Story 8. Lost Turner. This mind, the compass spun in circles when I reached the coordinates, and that should have been my final warning to turn back. I am a geologist from Nevada, 49 years old. I have spent my career evaluating mineral deposits, consulting for mining operations, and hunting for forgotten claims that might still hold value. I understand ore bodies and fault lines and the way gold deposits form in igneous intrusions. But what I found in the Yukon backcountry was not geology. It was something else entirely. Something that has been protecting a fortune in gold for over a century by leading men to their deaths. The story of John Turner is well known in Yukon mining circles. In 1898, during the height of the Klondike gold rush, Turner filed a claim for what he described as the richest vein of gold he had ever seen. He showed samples in Dawson City that assayed at 70 ounces per ton, an almost unbelievable concentration. He registered his claim, purchased supplies, and headed back into the wilderness to begin extraction. He never returned. Search parties found his camp, his equipment, and his supplies all neatly arranged as if he had just stepped away. But Turner himself had vanished. And more troubling, the claim office in Dawson burned to the ground 3 days later, destroying all records of where his claim was located. The samples he had shown were stolen from the assay office the same night. Since then, dozens of prospectors and treasure hunters have searched for lost Turner, this mine. Most give up after a few weeks. Some die in accidents. A few simply vanish, their bodies never recovered. And those who survive all tell the same story. They saw something in the wilderness. A figure, a man in old mining clothes who appeared on ridgelines and disappeared into fog, who left boot prints that led in circles, who seemed to be guiding them away from something or toward something or into something they could not escape. I spent 2 years researching Turner, his disappearance. I obtained copies of newspaper accounts, studied geological surveys from that era, and interviewed descendants of men who had searched for the mine. I triangulated likely locations based on Turner, his known movements, and the geology that would support a high-grade gold deposit. I narrowed it down to a 10-square-mile area in the mountains east of Dawson. Last August, the first flew into Dawson and hired a bush pilot to drop me in the backcountry. I had supplies for 3 weeks, satellite communication, and GPS coordinates for 6 promising locations. I was confident, professional, convinced that modern technology and geological expertise would succeed where others had failed. I was wrong about that, because lost Turner's mine is not lost due to poor record-keeping or difficult terrain. It is lost because something wants it to stay lost. The pilot dropped me at a lake surrounded by mountains, their peaks still holding snow despite the summer heat. The terrain was brutal. Dense spruce forest giving way to alpine tundra and exposed rock. Grizzly country. I saw fresh scat and claw marks on my first day. But I am experienced in bear country. I made noise, carried spray, kept my camp clean. The bears were not what I needed to worry about. I reached my first target location on day 3. A rock outcropping with visible quartz veining, the kind of formation that often hosts gold. I took samples and they showed promising traces, but nothing like the concentrations Turner had reported. I moved on to the next location. That was when the compass started acting strange. The needle would spin, then point in a direction that made no sense relative to the sun's position. My GPS began showing errors, placing me miles from where I knew I actually was. I recalibrated multiple times. The equipment was functioning properly. But something about this area was interfering with magnetic fields and satellite signals. On day 5, I found the first marker, a cairn of stacked stones on a ridgeline, the kind prospectors built to mark claims or boundaries. It was old, the stones weathered and covered in lichen, but at the base, protected from the elements, was a wooden stake with letters carved into it. J.T. John Turner. I had found his claim, or at least one of his markers. My heart was racing. I took photographs, documented the location, and started searching the immediate area for more markers or signs of excavation. That was when I saw him. A figure standing on the next ridge over, maybe 200 yards away. A man in dark clothes and a wide-brimmed hat. Even at that distance, I could tell the clothing was wrong for modern hikers. Too formal, too old-fashioned. He was watching me. I waved. He did not wave back. He just stood there, motionless, for perhaps 30 seconds. Then he turned and walked behind a boulder and did not reappear. I told myself it was another treasure hunter, someone else who had found Turner, his markers, and was working the same area. But when I hiked over to that ridge, there was no one there. And more unsettling, there were no footprints. The ground was soft tundra moss that would show every step. But where the figure had been standing, there was nothing. Just undisturbed moss and lichen. That night in my tent, I heard sounds outside. Footsteps, circling the camp, heavy boots on gravel. I called out, asking who was there. No response. Just the footsteps, circling, stopping occasionally as if someone was examining my gear. I unzipped the tent and shone my flashlight. Nothing, but in the beam of light I could see fresh boot prints in the dirt around my tent. Old-style lace-up boots with a distinctive heel pattern, the kind gold rush miners wore. I did not sleep that night. At dawn I examined the prints more carefully. They led away from camp, heading north up a slope toward a canyon I had not yet explored. I followed them. The tracks were clear for the first 100 yards, then they simply stopped. Not faded, not obscured by rock, just stopped, as if the person making them had been lifted into the air. But there was something else. Scratched into a rock face where the tracks ended was an arrow, pointing up the canyon, and below it, carved in the same style as the stake, were initials. JT. I was being led, guided, by something that walked like a man, left tracks like a man, but was not entirely present in the physical world. And every instinct I had was screaming that I should turn back, that following those marks was exactly what had happened to all the others who vanished searching for this mine. But I kept going, because the geologist in me needed to know, needed to see if the mine actually existed, needed to understand what Turner had found that was worth protecting or hiding or dying for. The canyon narrowed as I climbed. The walls pressed in, blocking the sun, creating shadows even at midday. And in those shadows I kept seeing him, Turner, or his ghost, or whatever he had become, always ahead of me, always just out of reach, leading me deeper. I found the mine entrance on the 6th day, a horizontal shaft cut into the canyon wall, shored up with timbers that should have rotted away decades ago but somehow still stood. The opening was dark and the air coming out of it smelled like earth and rust and something else. Something organic. Decay. I should not have gone inside. Every safety protocol I had ever learned said to never enter an abandoned mine alone. The timbers could collapse. The air could be toxic. There could be vertical shafts hidden in darkness. But I had come too far. Invested too much. I needed to see. I went in with my headlamp and found myself in a tunnel perhaps 5 feet high and 4 feet wide. The walls showed tool marks from hand drilling. This was definitely gold rush era work. I moved carefully, testing each step, watching for cave-ins or drop-offs. 50 feet in I found the vein, and it was exactly what Turner had claimed. A band of quartz running through the host rock, shot through with visible gold. Flakes and nuggets embedded in the matrix. The richest deposit I had ever seen. Worth millions, maybe tens of millions. But there was something else in that tunnel. In the darkness beyond my light I could hear breathing. Slow and raspy. The sound of damaged lungs struggling for air. And I could smell that decay smell growing stronger. Not the clean smell of dry rock, but something wet. Biological. Wrong. I backed toward the entrance, keeping my light pointed forward. And that was when I saw him clearly for the first time. John Turner, standing in the tunnel ahead of me, close enough that I could see his face. He had been dead for a very long time. His skin was gray and desiccated. His eyes were empty sockets. His clothes hung on a skeletal frame that somehow still moved, still stood upright, still blocked my path. And in his hand he held a pickaxe, the blade rusted and dark with old stains. He raised the pickaxe, not threateningly, but pointing back the way I had come, telling me to leave, and I understood then what had happened. Turner had found his fortune and it had killed him. A cave-in maybe, or bad air, or simple exhaustion and exposure. He had died in this mine or near it, and his spirit, his ghost, his echo had remained, trapped by his obsession with the gold, unable to leave but also unable to let anyone else take what he had died to find. I ran, out of the tunnel, down the canyon, through the forest. I did not stop until I reached my base camp. I gathered only the essentials and hiked toward the extraction point, activating my emergency beacon. The pilot found me 2 days later, dehydrated and incoherent. I never filed a claim on the mine, never reported the location, because I understood what would happen if I did. More people would go looking. More people would find that canyon and that tunnel. And more people would encounter what remains of John Turner, still guarding his strike, still leading searchers in or keeping them out or confusing them until they are lost beyond rescue. The samples I took from outside the mine assayed at 68 ounces per ton. I have them in a safe deposit box. Physical proof that lost Turner, as mine, exists and holds a fortune. But I will never go back, because I know now that some treasures are not worth the cost. Some fortunes are guarded by obsessions so powerful they transcend death itself. So here's my question for you. If you knew where a fortune in gold was hidden, but reaching it meant confronting the ghost of a man who died protecting it, would you try? Would you risk becoming another story? Another vanished treasure hunter? Another cautionary tale told around campfires in Dawson City? Write your answer in the comments. But think carefully, because the Yukon is still there. Lost Turner, as mine, is still there. And John Turner is still standing guard over the richest vein of gold in North America, waiting for the next person foolish enough to think they can take what killed him to find. Some obsessions never die, and some fortunes demand a price higher than anyone should be willing to pay. Story 9. Woman who waits at Peggy S. Cove. I need to tell you about the woman I saw standing on the rocks at Peggy S. Cove during a storm last November, and why I am certain she was not alive, even though I watched her for almost 20 minutes before the waves took her. She stood on the outermost point, where the granite meets the black Atlantic water, wearing a long dress that whipped in the gale like it was made of fog rather than fabric. Her hair streamed behind her in the wind, and her arms were raised toward the ocean as if she was trying to embrace the storm itself. But what made my blood run cold was the sound she made. Not quite screaming, not quite singing, a keening wail that rose and fell with the wind, a sound of such profound grief that it felt like it was tearing holes in the air itself. And when she finally turned to look at me, her face was wrong. Not deformed or monstrous, just wrong, like someone had tried to sculpt a human face from memory and gotten the proportions slightly off. Then the next wave crashed over the rocks, and when the spray cleared, she was gone. My name is Robert. First, I'm a marine insurance adjuster from Boston, and last November I drove up to Nova Scotia to inspect a fishing vessel that had run aground near Halifax. The work took longer than expected, and by the time I finished, it was late afternoon with a storm system moving in from the Atlantic. I should have driven straight back to my hotel, but I had never been to Peggy S. Cove, and the famous lighthouse was only about 30 miles from where I was working. I decided to make a quick stop before the weather got too bad. I arrived around 4:30. The sky was already dark gray, heavy with clouds that seemed to hang just above the waterline. The parking lot was empty except for my rental car and one other vehicle, an old pickup truck that looked like it had been there for a while. The famous lighthouse stood on its rocky point, white against the storm-dark sky, exactly like the photographs. But the place felt different than I expected. Colder, more isolated. The wind off the ocean was fierce, and the waves were already building to dangerous heights. I walked down toward the rocks, my camera in hand, planning to get a few quick shots and leave. Signs everywhere warned visitors to stay back from the water, that rogue waves had killed people on these rocks, that the ocean here was unpredictable and deadly. I stayed well back from the edge, but even from a safe distance, I could feel the power of the waves as they exploded against the granite, sending spray 20 feet into the air. That was when I heard it, a sound rising above the wind and waves. A woman crying, not the kind of crying you hear in movies. This was raw and primal, the sound of someone whose grief had driven them beyond reason. I looked around, expecting to see someone nearby, maybe another tourist caught in the worsening weather. The rocks were empty, just granite and ocean and that relentless wind. The crying continued, and I realized it was coming from farther out, from the exposed rocks near the waterline where no one should be, especially not in conditions like this. I moved closer, carefully navigating the uneven granite, and that was when I saw her. A woman in a long dress standing on the outermost point of rock, right where the waves were hitting hardest. She had her back to me, facing the ocean, her arms raised, and she was making that terrible crying sound. My first thought was that she was trying to kill herself, that I was witnessing someone in the final moments before they let the ocean take them. I shouted at her, my voice barely carrying over the wind. She did not respond, did not turn, just kept crying and reaching toward the water like she was trying to grab hold of something out there in the waves. I moved as close as I dared, maybe 30 feet from where she stood, and called out again. This time she turned, slowly, like she had all the time in the world. And I saw her face. From a distance, she looked normal. A woman maybe in her 30s, pale skin, dark hair. But as I focused on her features, something felt deeply wrong. Her eyes were too far apart. Her mouth was too wide. The proportions of her face did not quite match how human faces should be arranged. It was subtle but profoundly disturbing, like looking at an AI-generated image that is almost perfect but fails in ways your brain recognizes without being able to articulate. She stared at me for several long seconds, and I felt a wave of cold that had nothing to do with the wind. Then she turned back to the ocean and resumed her crying, louder now, more desperate. Her dress whipped around her legs, and I noticed it was wrong too. The fabric moved like it had no weight, like it was made of mist that only appeared solid from a distance. And her feet, where they touched the rock, left no impression, no wet footprints, nothing. That was when I understood she was not real, not alive. Whatever I was seeing was not a suicidal woman, but something else, something that only appeared human until you looked closely enough to see the flaw. A presence, a ghost, a recording of someone who had stood on these rocks so many times in such profound grief that she had somehow become part of the landscape itself. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, to document what I was seeing, but the screen would not turn on. Dead. Completely dead despite being fully charged when I arrived. My camera was the same. I checked the battery. Full. But when I tried to turn it on, nothing happened. The electronics had simply stopped functioning in the presence of whatever stood on those rocks. The crying intensified. The woman raised her arms higher, reaching desperately toward the horizon, and now I could make out words in her wailing. A name. She was calling a name over and over, though the wind made it hard to hear clearly. Something like William or Willem. Each repetition was more anguish than the last, and with each cry, the waves seemed to grow larger, as if the ocean itself was responding to her grief. A particularly large wave crashed over the rocks where she stood. The spray engulfed her completely. When it cleared, she was still there, unchanged, her dress not even wet. But now she was looking at me again, and this time her expression had changed. Recognition. She saw me, not as someone who might help or interfere, but as a witness. As someone who could carry her story forward. She raised one arm and pointed. Not at me, past me, toward the shore, toward the small museum and visitor center near the parking lot. Then she opened her mouth wider than any human mouth should open, and the crying became a scream. A sound so full of loss and rage and desperation that I felt it in my chest like a physical blow. My knees buckled. I had to grab onto the rock to stay upright. The wind picked up to gale force. Rain began to fall in horizontal sheets. And through it all, she kept screaming and pointing, her impossible face twisted in an expression that transcended any normal human emotion. This was not just grief. This was grief that had calcified over decades or centuries into something harder and sharper, something that could cut through the barrier between life and death. Then the wave came, bigger than the others. A rogue wave, the kind the warning signs talked about, that rose up from the dark water like a moving wall and crashed down on the rocks with the force of a collapsing building. It hit where the woman stood, and the spray went up 50 feet into the air. I turned away, shielding my face from the stinging salt water. When I looked back, she was gone. I ran, back across the rocks, slipping on the wet granite, not caring about my footing or safety, just needing to get away from that place. I made it to the parking lot and sat in my car, soaking wet and shaking, watching the storm intensify over the cove. The old pickup truck was still there, but I did not see anyone near it. After several minutes, I drove to the visitor center and went inside. An older man was closing up for the day, preparing to lock the doors before the storm got worse. I asked him about the woman on the rocks. He looked at me carefully, studying my face, and I could tell from his expression that he knew exactly what I was talking about. He asked what she looked like. I described her, the dress, the reaching arms, the impossible face, the crying that turned into screaming. The man nodded slowly and told me I had seen the crying woman of Peggy's Cove. He said the legend went back over 200 years. A young woman whose husband was a fisherman had lived in the small community that once existed near the cove. One day her husband went out in his boat and never came back. Lost to the sea, like so many fishermen over the centuries. But this woman could not accept his death. She would come to the rocks every day, stand on the outermost point, and cry for him to return. She did this for weeks, then months, then years. The grief drove her mad. Eventually, on a stormy night not unlike this one, she walked out onto the rocks during a gale and let the waves take her. But according to the legend, she never left. Her spirit remained, bound to those rocks by the intensity of her grief and her refusal to accept that her husband was gone. On stormy nights, Especially in late autumn and winter, people report seeing her standing on the rocks, crying and reaching toward the ocean, still waiting for a man who has been dead for over 200 years to sail home. Some say she is warning others about the dangers of the sea. Others say she is trying to lure people into the water, wanting company in her endless waiting. The man told me I was not the first to see her, and I would not be the last. He said most tourists never see anything unusual, but people with certain sensitivities, or those who come at the right time under the right conditions, sometimes witness her. He said the crying is always the same, always that desperate, heartbreaking sound. And those who get close enough to see her face report the same thing I had. That something is wrong with it. That it is almost human but not quite, as if grief itself had tried to reconstruct a person and gotten some of the details wrong. I asked why the legend was not more widely known, why there were not signs or information about it. He said the community preferred to keep it quiet. Tourism was important, and ghost stories scared people away. Plus, the ocean was dangerous enough without adding supernatural elements. Better to let people think it was just folklore, just a story, even though locals knew the truth. That the crying woman was real, that she was still there, still waiting, still trapped in the moment of her greatest loss. I drove back to Halifax in the storm, my hands gripping the wheel, my mind replaying what I had seen. My phone and camera never worked again. Both devices appeared functional but would not turn on, as if whatever I had encountered on those rocks had drained them of something essential. I had to buy replacements. Since then, I have researched the legend extensively. Multiple historical accounts mention a woman matching this description, though the details vary. Some sources say it happened in the late 1700s. Others place it in the early 1800s. All agree on the core facts. A fisherman lost at sea, a wife driven mad with grief, a death on the rocks, and a presence that lingers still, crying for someone who will never return. I think about her constantly. Not because she frightened me, though she did, but because of what she represents. The idea that love and loss can be so powerful they transcend death itself. That grief can be so intense it leaves a permanent mark on a place, an echo that plays over and over for anyone with the ability to perceive it. The crying woman is not evil. She is not trying to harm anyone. She is simply trapped, locked in an eternal moment of waiting and hoping and grieving for something that can never be. Peggy Cove is still one of the most photographed locations in Canada. Thousands of tourists visit every year. Most see nothing unusual, just rocks and ocean and a beautiful lighthouse. But on stormy nights, when the wind is right and the waves are high, some visitors hear the crying. Some see a figure in a long dress standing where no one should be standing. And a very few, like me, get close enough to see her face and understand that what they are witnessing is not a ghost story or a legend. It is a tragedy so profound that it has become part of the landscape itself. So here's what I need to know, and I want your honest answer. If you lost someone you loved so deeply that you could not accept their death, if your grief was so overwhelming that it consumed every moment of your existence, would you be able to let go eventually and find peace? Or would you become like the woman on the rocks, trapped forever in that moment of loss, unable to move forward, unable to stop waiting for something that will never come? Write your answer in the comments, because I think about this question every day, and I still do not know if the crying woman is suffering or if her eternal waiting is the only form of love she has left. Story 10. Walk home. Have you ever taken the same walk so many times that you stop paying attention to where you are going? That thought keeps me awake at night, because I took the same walk Melanie Ethier took 28 years ago, and I think I finally understand what happened to her. I think I know why they never found a body. And I wish to God I had just driven home that night instead. My name is not important. What matters is that I am a sales representative for a paper company, and last September I found myself in New Liskeard, Ontario, a town so small it barely registers on most maps. Population 3,000. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and nothing ever happens. Except once, in 1996, when a 17-year-old girl named Melanie Ethier left her friend's house at 11:30 on a Monday night to walk the 8 blocks home. She never made it. No witnesses, no suspects, no evidence. She simply vanished between one streetlight and the next, as if the earth had opened up and swallowed her whole. The case went national. Search teams combed every inch of the surrounding forest. They dragged the lake. They interviewed hundreds of people. Nothing. 28 years later, her case is still open, still unsolved. Just another name on the long list of people who disappeared into thin air. I knew the story because my client mentioned it over dinner. He was a local, born and raised, and he remembered when it happened. He told me about the searches, about how the whole town came together, about how Melanie, his mother, still puts up posters every year on the anniversary, even though everyone knows she's gone. He pointed out the window of the restaurant toward a quiet residential street lined with old maples and said that was the route she took. The same route dozens of kids still take every day. After dinner, I went back to my motel, a run-down place called the Northland Inn on the edge of town. But I could not stop thinking about Melanie, about that walk, 8 blocks, less than a mile, the kind of distance you would not think twice about. I decided to walk it myself. I am not sure why. Morbid curiosity, maybe, or the feeling that if I could just see the route, I could understand what happened. It was just after midnight when I left the motel. The streets were empty. The air was cool and smelled like dying leaves and wood smoke. I started where Melanie started. Her friend. This house on Armstrong Street. A small bungalow with a porch light that was probably the last thing she saw before she stepped into the dark. From there, the route was simple. Down Armstrong to 3rd Street. Left on 3rd until it dead ended at Latchford. Then right on Latchford for 2 blocks to her house. The streetlights were spaced far apart, creating long pools of shadow between each one. Old lights, the kind that buzz and flicker. I walked slowly, trying to imagine what she would have seen. What she would have felt. It was late summer when she disappeared. Warm. School had just started. She was probably thinking about homework. About boys. About all the normal things teenagers think about. I made it to 3rd Street without incident. The houses here were dark. A few porch lights. A television glowing blue through a window. Nothing unusual. But as I turned onto Latchford, something changed. The air got colder. Not gradually. All at once. Like I had walked through an invisible wall. My breath came out in clouds. I could see frost forming on the parked cars. In September. In weather that had been 60 degrees an hour ago. I stopped walking. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around. To go back to the motel. But I needed to see. I needed to know. The streetlight ahead of me flickered and went out. Then the next one. Then the next. Darkness rolling toward me like a wave. I fumbled for my phone, turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating nothing but empty sidewalk and the skeletal branches of trees overhead. That is when I heard the footsteps. Behind me. Light. Quick. Like someone running. I spun around, and the beam of my flashlight caught something moving between 2 houses. A flash of pale fabric. Dark hair, gone before I could focus. I called out, asked if someone needed help. My voice sounded wrong in the cold air. Flat, like the darkness was swallowing the sound. No answer, just the wind moving through the trees and the distant hum of traffic on the highway. I kept walking. I did not know why. I should have run, but something pulled me forward. A need to finish what I had started. To walk those 8 blocks and prove to myself that it was just a street. Just a normal path through a normal town. The footsteps came again, closer this time. I could hear breathing, fast and panicked. And then I heard something else. A sound I will never forget. A voice, young, female, calling for help. But the words were wrong. Stretched out, like a tape playing at the wrong speed. I ran toward the sound, my flashlight bouncing wildly. The beam caught movement again. A figure standing in the middle of the road, facing away from me. Long dark hair, a denim jacket, jeans. The same outfit Melanie had been wearing in the posters. I froze. The figure did not move. Did not turn around. Just stood there, perfectly still, like a statue. I tried to speak, but my throat had closed up. I took a step forward. Then another, close enough now to see details. The jacket was old, faded. The jeans were torn at the knees. And there was something wrong with the way she was standing. Her feet were not quite touching the ground. I reached out. My hand was shaking so hard I could barely control it. I touched her shoulder. She turned. I cannot describe what I saw. It was her face. Melanie. His face. I recognized it from the posters. But it was wrong. The features were there, but they were hollow. Empty. Like someone had carved a mask and forgotten to put anything behind it. Her eyes were black. Not the pupils. The entire eye. Black and endless. And when her mouth opened, the sound that came out was not human. It was screaming. Dozens of voices. Hundreds. All layered on top of each other. Men, women, children, all screaming the same thing. Saying they wanted to go home. That they had been walking and could not find their way back. I stumbled backward. Fell. My phone skittered across the pavement. The flashlight beam spinning crazily. When it stopped, the light was pointed at the ground beneath where the figure had been standing. And I saw them. Footprints. Dozens of them. Maybe more. All different sizes. all pressed into the pavement like the concrete was soft. They overlapped, circled. Some were bare feet, some were shoes, some were just smears, like something had been dragged. The figure was gone, but the cold remained. And I could still hear the footsteps, all around me now, running, circling. I grabbed my phone and ran. I do not remember the route back to the motel. I just ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I made it back just before 2 in the morning. I locked the door, pushed a chair against it, turned on every light. My hands were still shaking. I checked my phone. 53 missed calls, all from the same number. My own number. I listened to the voicemails. Every single one was the same. Breathing, heavy and wet. And underneath it, barely audible, that same stretched out voice calling for help. I left New Liskeard at sunrise. Did not check out. Did not say goodbye to my client. Just drove. But I could not stop thinking about what I had seen. About those footprints. About the voices. I started researching. Not just Melanie. Every unsolved disappearance in the area. There were more than I expected. A hunter in 87. A tourist in 92. A truck driver in 2004. All vanished within a 5-mile radius of that street. All last seen walking alone at night. I found something else too. An old newspaper article from 1973. A kid, 12 years old. He told police he had been walking home from a friend's house when he saw something on Latchford Street. A door, standing in the middle of the sidewalk. No frame, no building, just a door. He said it was open. And inside he could see people. Dozens of them, walking in circles. He ran home. When police came back with him the next day, there was nothing there. They wrote it off as a kid, this imagination. But 3 months later, another person disappeared on that same street. I think I know what happened to Melanie up here. I think she walked into something. A place that exists between one step and the next. A trap disguised as a familiar street. And I think she is still there. Still walking. Still trying to find her way home. Along with everyone else who made the mistake of taking that road. Because here's what terrifies me. When I got home, I found something in my jacket pocket. Something I know was not there before. A small piece of paper, torn from a notebook. On it was an address. My address. And underneath, written in handwriting I did not recognize, were 4 words. We found your house. Last night, I heard footsteps outside my window. Light, quick, like someone running. And when I looked outside, I saw a figure standing under the street light across from my house. Long dark hair, denim jacket, watching. I do not know what to do. I do not know if I brought something back with me from New Liskeard, or if I am just losing my mind. But every night the footsteps get closer. And I'm starting to think that walk does not end when you reach your destination. I think it follows you. I think it becomes part of you. So let me ask you this. Have you ever walked the same route so many times that you stopped paying attention? Have you ever felt like you were being watched on a familiar street? Have you ever seen something out of the corner of your eye that vanished when you looked directly at it? Tell me in the comments, because I need to know if I'm the only one, or if there are others out there who took a walk they should not have taken, who stepped into something they cannot step out of, who are still walking, still trying to find their way home.
Thank you for visiting to Midnight Whisper Stories. I am the creator of this channel, where every dark story is designed to help you escape the noise of the day and immerse yourself in a world that spark your imagination. I write every script, design every image, hear voice actors to bring my stories to life, and edit everything myself. So sit back, relax, and let the whispers of the night guide you.